Good morning, everybody. You just heard Tarantella Napolitana from. Oh, you can't see me. Hang on, let me fix that real quick. So you just heard Tarantella Napolitana from Gruppo Ocarinistico Pugliese, which is the original Italian ocarina septet. They've been around for a very, very long time. And Fabio Galliani wanted me to show this at the beginning of the panel. And I know this is Saijun's panel, so I really appreciate him. Yeah, being in charge of presenting for Ocarina history. He is doing awesome. And let me just take the time to introduce Saijun. He is an amazing professor and collector. Um, he has been around the ocarina for many years, and he's just a great overall person. He has a really interesting and awesome collection that I want you guys to see. I saw just a few this morning while we were testing the microphone and the camera. And I think y'all will really enjoy this very special treat that is this session called Ocarina History. So I'm passing host to Saijun so he can turn his camera on and turn his sound on. And whenever he's ready, we can start the presentation. Hey, Saijun.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good
Um,
morning.
well, since I won't be hearing most of you, if you have questions, please put it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm going to take my headphone off um, so that I could move around to pick up my ocarinas when necessary. Okay. So as Nicholas has said, I'm now being categorized as a ocarina collector. I started to play ocarina just over 3 years ago when I was in Taiwan for an economics conference. In my day job, I teach economics at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. So I picked up my first ocarina in Taiwan, and now I'm also a member of the Shooting Star Ocarina, which you are going to um, hear from us very soon. I believe our video is up tomorrow. Um, anyway, thank you, Nicholas, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you everyone for coming. Um, I have a outline for today's session. I divided into five areas that I want to talk about. Some are longer, some are shorter. Okay. So the five areas that I'm going to talk about, the first one is how it started in Budrio, Italy. And then we are going to move focus to see how it started in Japan, where our modern day Asian fingering 12-hole ocarinas were being invented. And then I'll talk a little bit about the US market before Zelda. Okay. And then last but not least, I will talk about the English four-hole system, and we'll end the presentation with some history on the multi-chamber ocarinas, double, especially triple chamber ocarina. Okay. So I also have, being a professor, I also have lecture notes in front of me, so I could consult my notes and know I'm not going off places. So if we think about really the start of the ocarina, and I should monitor the chat um, so that if I have questions, I know. Um, if there is no question, I assume you guys hear me okay. So if we think about ocarinas, it's a clay whistle, right? A clay instrument. And if we think about clay instrument, we know that in many cultures, for a long time, there are lots of clay instruments like clay whistles. For example, the notable ones that we are aware of that are popular are the Chinese xun. I actually don't have one, I'm sorry. And a Latin American clay vessel flute. I think everybody who plays the ocarina has one of those South American, souvenir kind of ocarina. I actually found one the other day, but I don't know where I put it. I just recently moved here, so many of my ocarinas are actually in bubble wraps. You can actually see some bubble wraps on the back. Okay. So that's, if we trace really thousands of years, those are some of the early clay vessels that we could think about. And here, how it got to Bugio, Italy, how it got to Italy specifically, right? And I know Christy is in attendance today, and Christy a few years ago wrote an honor thesis on the topic, or touch on the topic, and I am going to just cite her work here, and she cited multiple sources. That it is believed that the invention of the modern transverse ocarina, which is the sweet potato shape that we know, invented by Giuseppe Donati, was influenced by the performance of the Aztec musicians that actually has came to popularity in Europe since 1527, according to his paper, right? So it was popular there and went throughout Europe for many years, and of course now we know that in 1853, in 1853 in Bugio, Donati is believed to have invented what we know as the modern transverse ocarina, the 10-hole Italian ocarina. He was actually only 17 in 1853. I'll just say a little bit about him. Later, he moved to Bologna, a nearby big city, in 1878, and he continued to make ocarina there. So he had quite a long career, actually. He passed away in 1925 at the age of 89. Okay. So he actually lived very long. And here I have one of his ocarinas that was made during his later years that has the stem Bologna on there. So this is the one. We have the stem down here. I don't think you could quite see, but the stem reads something G. Donati Bologna. Okay, that's all I could read, and there is also a stem here. Okay, Donati ocarinas has a very typical shape. The easiest way to identify it is by looking at the mouthpiece. It has kind of a very unique angle for that. And this one, I don't know how old it is. He passed away in 1925, so I'm going to assume about 100 years old. It's a very high breath ocarina. I believe this one is designed to be played at F. Um, but with moderate breath curve, I'm just play as one semitone down, so play about at the E. But somewhere between E and F is what I will be playing right now. Okay, and let's see. So somewhere in E, that's where what I was playing. Okay. Um, so I guess it's only fair I play a tune that's Italian. Um, so this is the well-known tune. I must not be speaking Italian very well. To Sandy Dally's Dally. I don't know what it is. Okay. That's a Christmas song. I know that, but I don't actually know what that means in Italian. If someone can help, please go ahead and do that. Okay. Yes, indeed. I see. I believe it was David. The timbre is really nice. It has very unique timbre. I don't know how to describe it. It's somewhere between very piercing and very warm. It has a very full tone. Uh, uh, um, 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 and I really think it's very unique. Okay. Um, so that's Donati. After Donati, ocarina making in Bugio, in my opinion, kind of went in two different directions. One, of course, continues in Bugio until today. And I'm going to tell you that, I spent most of last evening trying to figure out how to read Italian names. That is what I spent most of my evening last night. So one continues in Bugio until today, of course, and the other I will talk about went to France and England. And I will now continue to talk about the Korean history in Bugio. So in general, five makers after Donati are generally considered as the Bugio makers. Right after Donati, we have Viginali. Okay, I actually have one of Viginali's ocarina made in Bugio, but I couldn't find it. Um, the next one is Kiyasu, as I have learned how to speak about that name. Um, and then the next one is Emilio Cesare, which I will actually show you in a minute. And the next one is Minani. And then the most modern one currently is Fabio Menanio, okay, in still making ocarinas in Bugio. Okay. So let me put my Donati ocarina back. So I have a few ocarinas made by Emilio. Should be pronounced Cesare, Cesare. So he started to make ocarinas in Bugio in 1919, about 100 years ago, and later on he moved to San Remo, I believe a coastal city. And after a short pause, he started to make and play ocarina again in 1938. Okay, so both of these two ocarinas are made by Scenare, and this is the more typical form of Italian ocarinas that you will notice the shape even for later makers. So he is actually known for making gun shape ocarinas as anti-war statements, I believe, during World War II. I don't have one of the gun shape, but he excels in making ocarinas of other shapes I have one here that apparently have some decorations on there that looks like either an oboe or a clarinet or a flute. Um, and on the back, both thumb holes is on the same side of the voicing. Okay, so those are the two thumb holes. Okay, um, this ocarina is actually very difficult to hold and play. So I'll just play a scale. I'm not going to venture into playing a tone for now. Those decorations, it actually helps with placing your finger sometimes. Okay, so you could actually feel the edge of those bumps and know whether you have placed it correctly. Okay, so I think this is a very loud ocarina. It's in the key of F. Okay. I have difficulty finding the back thumb hole because this is a very awkward place, and so you know it's not easy to play. Okay. This one is supposed to be in the key of C, so an alto C, but for some reason I believe this is a really really low breath one. If I just blow normally, it will go to the key of D. Okay, so his ocarina has a very unique stem that you could see. Also, the wide wing is a very small hole. Actually, both of them is kind of the same kind. Okay, so that's Chaseray. Now, the person actually after Donati in Burgio would be Misetti, the Misetti brothers. Okay, so the older brother is Ecole and the younger brother is Alberto. Okay, so I have not found any ocarina made by Alberto. All of mine, or all the ones that I see, is marked as E Misete. And of course, I know David has one that's made by Misete that's stamped in Burgio. All the ones that I have here in my collection are stamped made in Paris. So they moved to Paris in 1877, and 2 years later, Alberto moved to London. And so both of them are kind of very good composers and music educators. Ecole made ocarinas, and Alberto wrote a lot of tunes. Ecole stopped making ocarinas in 1912. So all the Misetti ocarina that you see is more than 100 years old. And he passed away in 1918 at the age of 77. Okay, so you know the most typical way to identify a Misetti ocarina is by two things. I have several things actually. They have a unique stamp. Usually, when you see a Misetti ocarina, they have a tuning slide. This one actually doesn't. I have a few that do, but I don't know where they are, in which box right now. And also, and I'll come back to this, is the split right pinky hole for play C sharp. Okay. So this is an ocarina in G. Okay. It's supposed to need a lot more air. Okay. So I am I'm going to play a tune. Let's see. How about every round. Okay, so you know that's Misete Ocarina, and um, I think that that would conclude my part on the Italian ocarinas. I'll come back to some of the European ocarinas later. Okay. Now I think this is a good time to talk about how it got started in Japan. Okay. And I have some really cool ocarina to show you in that regard. So we know that the modern Japanese 12-hole ocarina was invented by Takashi Akitagawa I believe successfully in 1948 is when he invented the 12 hole. But the Akita history page said that Akitagawa decided to become an ocarina maker after he saw a German-made bass ocarina in 1928. Okay, it was a very specific history, right? So it actually doesn't mention what was that German ocarina, but I think most likely it is a Finn, okay, a Finn ocarina that we know has made a lot of ocarinas back in the days, and it was actually made in current day Austria. I think they got maybe the location mixed up a little bit. And the reason I said that is because I actually have one of very special ocarina here. So this is a G ocarina, very small. Okay. For those of you who are familiar with Finn, you will notice that it just looked like a Finn. Okay, and everything just looked like a Finn. However, the stem, the oval-shaped stem, usually says Finn in the middle and made in Austria, actually says Montano Ocarina, Vienna, made in Japan. Okay, and it looks like it had original wordings but got scratched and re-stamped. Okay, and in place of the Finn logo, there is a different logo. I don't think you could clearly see that, but it's a building. Okay, and so I went online and found that Montano, the name that stem here, was actually founded in exactly 1928, the year that was said that Akitagawa saw his first ocarina. Okay, I think it was acquired by some other companies about 10-20 years ago, and it's actually a company that make acoustic guitar. And you could see, I find that the stem here in place of the original Finn stem is exactly as the stem of the Montano brand. Okay, so that's my my guess, speculation that the one that that Akitagawa saw was a Finn. Okay, so of course, Takashi Akitagawa went on to make the ocarina and invented the modern day 12-hole ocarina. And in my opinion, I think the biggest influence on him is actually the Miseti. Okay, why do I say that? Well, I have two reasons that I believe that is true. Number one is that if you just look at the Miseti ocarina and compare to the typical Italian ocarina, you see the biggest difference is that the pointy tip, the tippy point, the pointy tip is no longer there. The Miseti ocarina looks like the modern day sweet potato ocarina already. Okay, so that's one reason. The second reason is that if you look online and look at all Akita ocarinas, you will see that they also have the split right pinky holes, just like the Miseti. Okay, I actually have just recently acquired an old Akita ocarina has the split right pinky hole, but sadly it has not arrived yet. Um, so you know, he invented the 12-foot ocarina in 1948, and of course he has the brand. Originally the stem Prima, and then now Akita. And since then, they got the patent in 1950. But sadly, he passed away in 1958 at age of 49. His son and his wife continue to make ocarinas and play ocarinas. His wife passed away a few years ago, but his son is still playing and making today. So here, I have a old Prima ocarina. This is a stamp that is relatively new to me. I believe this stamp indicates that this ocarina was made by Takashi Kitagawa. That looks like one of those statues shown on his museum website. This is in the key of F. It has a few other stamps, and the cool thing about Akita Ocarina is that their brand stamp actually changed over the years. So by looking at that stamp, you will be able to tell approximately when this ocarina was made. And this one is made in the late second half of the 1950s. Okay. So it's in the key of F. Okay. So I'll play a short tune. It has a little bit noise, not very pure in a way, but I like it. I like it has a little bit texture in that way. Okay. Okay. So that's Japanese ocarina, and let me just shift back our focus back to Europe, and I am just going to mention a few more noticeable and unique ocarinas. The first one is a pair of Mason ocarina. I'm going to take the small one as an example, and you see that there is actually a big one down there. So history has it that there are three different independent makers in the Mason area in Germany that started to make ocarinas before 1900. It's not actually that company Mason that we know producing plates and things like that that make these ocarinas, even though they have that stamp. That stamp is more for location. Okay, and in fact, in the Mason region, there are quite a number of other ocarina makers. Some of you may know there is a ocarina name called what's the name? I have actually one ocarina also from that region, but not in this kind of pattern. Okay. If you look for Mason ocarinas, you generally find three kinds of patterns. One is this typical blue onion. The other one is the floral pattern I'm going to show you in a minute. And also there is another one that are usually made by Freya and Company, Freya and Co. That has a dark blue or black background, and with sometimes have a slide and just have patches of a floral pattern. Well, at least that's the three I own. I was not able to find the one with the slide. Okay. Well, thank you. I see the chat in AM. So I'll play this. This is a really loud, really high breath ocarina. some reason, most of my ocarinas are in the key of F. So I forgot the rest. I'm sorry. Um, uh, this is a um, 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 Mason Ocarina, and I have one really special here. That is my big boy. Okay, this is huge ocarina. It's a few kilograms heavy. It's really heavy, but it has a wonderful tone. Well, you cannot play this for very long because condensation usually builds up with a porcelain ocarinas. The condensation was okay for the other small one because it's high breath. It kind of pushed the water out, but for this one, it's very low breath, so it's very difficult to play. And I believe the wording on there indicates this is an advertisement piece, and I believe this is bound for the US or the English speaking countries. A few years ago, there was one auction out in Europe that is the same size but have more words on there. The words in English saying that the new blue Mason ocarina is available here. Okay, that indicates directly that's an advertisement piece. Okay, so that one was sold in Europe a few years ago for 700 euros. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how much I pay for this. I'm really so that you won't come to my house and try to steal this. Okay. So that's the big one. I also have a very unique ocarina here. This is in a box. This is one made by, for those of you who are a long time member of the Ocarina Network Forum, you would notice this. This is the Thomas Zack Ocarina. I think Valerie Pie posted this every Valentine's Day as the chocolate ocarina. Okay, so it doesn't play really well. I'm not going to play this, and it's really old and it's stinky. It seems like it has been in that box forever. So that's that. And of course, the most well-known European anti-ocarina would be the Finn. For those of you who have, well, I have a Finn here. I actually have a Finn with a slide in C. So they are very good ocarinas. Finn Ocarina actually have several different stems. The most well-known one is with the Sydney Exhibition 1879. Daniel, which one are you speaking about? The Mason? Okay, the Mason is started before 1900, and I think they made into the 20th century and maybe before the World War II or around World War II they stopped. I actually haven't checked the Thomas Zack, but I would think it's a similar period. I would need to go back to do my homework. But if we talk back to the Finn, they actually have two stems. One is the 1879 Sydney exhibition, a war stamp, and the other one is earlier in 1877. And then the awful stamp actually have a number of varieties. It has made in Vienna, made in Germany, and also there are ones with French, and also a number of other variations, maybe 5 or 6 of them. Okay. Um, History had it that they stopped making ocarina in 1939. So this one is a thin alto C, C6, with a slide, and I have to pull the slide out. Um, so I think I'm going to play this. I hope it's loud enough. That is the tuning slide. If I put it all the way back, it will reduce the inside volume, and it's going to be sharper. So now it's in the key of C sharp. Okay, so that's a thin ocarina, and I should move along. I don't have a ton of time, but following Finn, the EWA ocarina looks really just like a Finn. This is also a big boy. This is a bass G, but I'm not going to play it in the interest of time. So you can see it looks really like Finn. Okay. And of course, one of the more special and well-known European ocarina in that period is the Charles Matthias. I forgot to look up the French name. I look up all the Italian names. So they started in around 1880s in Paris. And if you look up in the used ocarina market, anti-ocarina market, you would notice the old US plastic ocarina that they sent to the soldiers in war. I have one of the booklets here. I don't have one of those plastic ocarinas. It was said that similarly, this metal, nickel-coated ocarina also sent to soldiers in war. It doesn't play very, very well. It play reasonably okay. So okay, so it's Mafia. We got a Mafia here. That's not a very good joke. Okay, I don't want to play this for too long. It's nickel coated. I don't want to die of ocarinas, die from ocarinas, I should say. Okay, so that's all the European ocarinas and Japan, and now I will get to my next topic on my agenda, which is the US market before Zelda. What happened in the US before Zelda? Okay, and I'll just talk through a few things here. There are two really old antique makers that one of them is Gundo Bondi. I did some history about him. He's actually born in Italy in 1879 in July and died in Covington, Kentucky in the US in 1945. Okay. Now, if you see a Bondi ocarina that usually have the eagle-shaped stem, I couldn't find mine. In my experience, they don't play very well. I have tried several, maybe 8 or 10 of them, and none of them play very well through the whole range. Okay. The second person I should mention is Rudolf Tesla. I actually have one that's sent to me by my friend Mr. Johnson. So Tesla, it is said, according to one of the posts on the Ocarina Network forum, he started to make Ocarina in 1878. I was actually very surprised to find all these US makers to have started so early. Because remember the ocarina was invented in Italy in 1853 only, right? So it's about 25 years later, Rudolf Tesla started to make his ocarina here until 1920 that he died. He made these ocarinas in the Finger Lake region in central New York, which happened to be an area that I have lived in for like about 3 years, okay? So this one is in the key of E. So it plays well in one octave, right? Um, so that's some of the, and I have this last one that's I guess really cool. Many of you noticed this. The Jogarina, made by Old Glory. Okay, the company Old Glory. In the 20s and 30s, I believe. Um, it actually plays. Okay, let me find something that I could play. It actually have a big, really big opening. It plays better last night. I'm not adventurous with this old ocarina. Okay. The bottom actually have a plug that you could take out. Okay, so the Jogarina. And there are a few other makers I just want to mention that, before Zelda hit in late 1990s, before that we have a few makers that we know has already started to make ocarina. Of course, there is Sandy Schmidt of Clazy, who sold her ocarinas with her late husband, Richard, at the Pike Place Market in Seattle for many, many years and retired only recently. I have one of typical Clazy with a Zelda logo. This is actually the first ocarina that I got that has a Zelda logo on there. It was actually a gift from Sandy. And then, of course, we have Anita Fong, who started to make ocarinas in 1974 and stopped in around 2008. Okay, I'm just putting all this here in front of me. And of course, there is Charles Hind to make the wooden ocarinas, and lastly, the very special Alan Albright to make the double wooden ocarina, and I'll play this. Okay, so actually I have two chambers that could play harmony, and they are fourth apart. So yes, TNG ocarinas, but I'm not including anything that you could get easily right now. In the ocarina history lecture, I should say. So it has two chambers. It's inline and cross fingering, and with that tip, we could talk a little bit about the English four-hole system, which was invented by John Taylor in 1963, and later the two thumb holes were added. I don't have a my first ocarina is actually a pendant 6-hole, and I don't have one with John Taylor. The closest I have is a John Langley. Usually it's a round shape, but I got this very small one that is a bird shape. Okay, it's very tiny, very, very tiny. Okay, so yes, it sounds really good. To my surprise, it sounds really, really good. Okay, and of course, the Albright Ocarina also killed our last session, our last topic on the multi-chamber ocarinas, and I believe the earliest multi-chamber ocarina, a double, was invented and made by Vicinelli already, and I know David has one made by Cesare. I always wanted to get that one. If you are willing to sell it to me, please. And of course, Akita has developed their double ocarinas. I actually have bought one, but not arrived yet. So the usual double ocarina that we have. Let me get one. I just have one that's made by Noble here, so now you have something more modern. The second chamber started with high E, right? And of course, we have an alternative system that's called a V fingering sometimes. And an alternative is the one made by Mr. Pacciani, that the second chamber starts with C, so it's fourth apart from the left hand of the first chamber. Okay, so that's double, but I think the more interesting thing is to look at the triple ocarina. And I'm not going to play this double and triple. I'm not that good with multi-chamber ocarina, but the difference in the V and P fingering really makes a huge difference when it comes to triple. Okay, so triple ocarina was said to be invented by Mr. Hatano, Morikuni Hatano, I believe around 1997 in Japan. I actually have one here that's made by Mr. Hatano. This is unglazed. This is a 10-year anniversary version, a triple ocarina made by the original Mr. Hatano. Okay. So the first and second chamber is your usual V fingering. I think I should mention the third chamber, which actually starts with C sharp, if we cover all holes, and then goes to D, E, F, and G. Okay, and after playing this, I can understand why some of the triple ocarina players like the the so-called Akina system, because it's very easy to play the accidentals. Okay, for the first chamber, the accidentals are by covering the right index finger that we all know. For the second chamber, all the accidentals are created by covering the right pinky hole. So you have this as the C sharp all cover, and then if you want to have the D sharp, you are going to cover like that, and this is the E sharp, and so on and so forth. Okay, for the P system, it is tuned fourth apart. So the second chamber starts with C, D, E, F, G, and the third chamber it starts with I believe starts with F, and then G, A, B flat, and C. Okay, and then if there is a fourth chamber, it will begin with B flat, C, D, E, and F, and create lots of overlaps. Okay, Once again, I could play this fairly well, but in the interest of time, I'm already 2 minutes over. Um, so I hope you have enjoyed this presentation of Ocarina history. And if you have any questions, I shall answer. And let me put my headphone on,
Yeah,
just
definitely.
in case Nicholas wants to
So
tell me something.
this is a part of the session where we just stop for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions for Saijun, type them in the chat or put them in the Q&A section. I know somebody asked earlier. Let me see. Let me scroll up. I think it was Jack. He asked earlier about the tuning slide on one of
Right.
your ocarinas. I don't know if you answered that question.
I answered that a little bit,
Okay.
but I could. So about that tuning slide, I think different makers would have different opinions about how to use that tuning slide. So, let me get another one.
Yeah, definitely. And he was also. Oh, I
So
know.
I have
You'll hear in a minute.
one with a tuning slide here made by Mr. Patriani. Okay, so he has told me recently that his ocarina will turn to play at 440 when the tuning slide is all the way in. And this is a very long tuning slide, so I think this is good demonstration. This is in the key of C. So if I pull it almost all the way out, I'm about a semitone down, and I could, of course, you could increase your breath. And it will be louder, and the breath curve is going to steeper, in my experience. So it's good to find a good place that fits your playing style. And of course, the real purpose of this is when the temperature changes. So he specifically told me that Mr. Patrani said that his ocarinas tune to 440 when the slide is all the way in, and in his own words, when it gets hot outside or in an environment, he could put that out and make the pitch a little bit lower because hot air will make the pitch sharp. Okay. Let me type, and this is a I don't think he's currently making any of this kind of model. I got this. This is actually an Asian fingering Petrani that I actually got from Japan. And of course, since someone mentioned TNG, I do have one. This is a soprano C. Plays pretty good. I like it. I haven't used it that much, but I like it a lot. So, what else do you guys want me to show you?
And he also typed Pacchioni, by the way. Let me
Pacchioni.
spell it out. I
Yes,
think you
I.
sent that directly to me. Here.
Ah, okay.
There
I'm
we go.
sorry.
No,
Ah,
it's okay. No worries.
to all panelists. I'm sorry, to all audience, I should say. Okay.
Lovely. Okay. Well, please, if you don't mind, show your virtual applause for Saijun taking the time to do the panel for Ocarina history this year for OcarinaFest 2021. I know I really enjoyed looking at a lot of the ocarinas that we had. Huge applause, virtual applause that we have for you. My personal favorite was your big contrabass one with the really awesome Messian design. I really love the sound of that one. That one was really cool.
Thank you.
And I
Yes,
also
I like
really
the
enjoyed
chords.
Donati.
I have to answer this question. I suppose it was asked several times. Um, I'm looking back to look at it, but when I saw it, I like it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so
Thank
much,
you, everyone.
Saijun. We will be back in just a minute. While we recalibrate and we kind of move things around, I'm gonna go ahead and just get us started with our next panel, which is going to be David Eric Ramos for Ocarina classification. I'm so excited about that. And I will also play a short video from David's YouTube channel real quick. So while we give a little bit of time for David to set up, I'm going to make you a panelist and make you a host. So here we go, everybody. All right, everybody. I think we're ready to go here. So hang on a second. There we go. Now you can see me. Hello, everybody. everybody. Good morning. It's been a very eventful morning with a very informative presentation from Saijun. I had so much fun at Ocarina history. It's such an important topic, especially if you're new to the Ocarina or you're recently coming to get to know the Ocarina community. It's so important to know our origins and where we come from. I do have a very important awesome person, important to the community, that has been making videos for over 10 years now. Oh my goodness, over more than 10 years. I don't know the exact number, but he'll tell you in a minute. But you probably have seen his videos. I know he was one of the first people that I found when I was looking for an instrument and how I got into the ocarina. His name is David, David Eric Ramos, and he is a composer, educator, influencer, and overall amazing ocarina player. And he is going to talk to us today about ocarina classifications. So here is David. He should be able to turn his camera on and his video audio on. I'm going to let him take it away.
Thank you, Nicholas. Can everybody hear me okay? You should be able to. And awesome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to, I guess it's technically day one of OcarinaFest. And just want to give a special thank you to all of the organizers and people behind the scenes making it happen. Wish we could all do this in person, but maybe next year. So yeah, just tacking on to what Zaijin just covered. Thank you for doing that, Zaijin. And he has an impressive collection. He's been collecting ocarinas for a long time, so I'm glad we were able to get some samples of the history lesson. And this is gonna fold perfectly right into that, with one exception. Rather than talking about ocarina classifications throughout history, I'm going to be focusing today on modern classification systems. And to do that, I'm going to see if I can pull my presentation up on screen. And if I probably should have tested this beforehand, but Nicholas, how do it says that the host has disabled screen sharing.
Sorry about that. Give me 1 second and it'll be fixed.
Thank you. So yeah, this video tacks
There it
on
is.
to thank you. Hi, Stephanie. Actually, let me just say hi to some people now that I'm just looking at it. Brad, what's up? Emily, hello. Hi, Christy. Hey, Christina. And I saw Stephanie too. Okay, awesome. So let me see if this works now. If we do share screen and then, all right, let's see if this pulls up. And if I hit play, I don't know what's gonna happen. All right, perfect. That worked better than I thought it was going to. All right, great. So yeah, today we're going to be focusing on modern classification systems. And as I was saying, I recently put out a video called Tenor Ocarinas Don't Exist. And the intention behind this video was about standardization. And for those of you who have not heard that term before, it basically just means when there is a set standard when it comes to a family of instruments. Like most classical instruments have standardization in place. Like there's a family of instruments that anybody can call out to, like a clarinet in a specific key, a trumpet in B flat, a cornet. Like it's well known throughout that entire community what instruments range goes to what instrument. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have that within the ocarina community because I'm going to say it's mostly still considered a folk instrument. And every ocarina maker has, for the most part, their own way of naming their ocarinas, which is perfectly within their right. The ocarina is in this really weird mix of like part art, like artisan craft, but then also it's a musical instrument. And so what my conclusion was when I was doing research for this particular video was that there are two widely accepted naming systems when it comes to the ocarina. There is the European system, which is we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but it's mostly used in Italy, in Germany, It's also used in France and in Austria. And then we also have the Asian system, which is used by makers in Taiwan, in South Korea, in China, and in Japan. Um, and in the video, I go a little bit more in depth into the history. I'm going to try to cover a little bit of it today just so that we're all on the same page. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. If you look at the left side here, you can see all the different makers that use these two different systems. However, the one thing that I left out of this video that I made was the alternatives to these two systems, the systems that are still being used from different ocarina makers. Some are used by 2 or 3, some are just used by individuals. And those are the ones I want to cover as well today. So first, let's go ahead and jump into what ocarina systems are being used in Europe. And first of all, we have the Italian system. This was invented by Giuseppe Donati. His original intention for the ocarina was to be used in an ensemble, and I'm glad that we got to see that performance by the GOB this morning, because that's the perfect example of how the ocarina was intended to be used. Now it's also used as a solo instrument, which is really fun. It's why I have a job today. But I'm really excited to also talk about the septet stuff in the next panel, and then also on Sunday when we all present our septet videos. So the way that this system works is that they use solfege or solfeggio to show the tuning of the instrument, like that song, do, a deer, a female deer, a golden drop of sun. So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And the two keys that they primarily focus on are C and G. So do is C and sol is G. And each ocarina in the set has a number, starting with the highest one that's 1, and the lowest one is 7. And the number for each ocarina also signifies the player's position within the septet. So the first ocarina or the first ocarina performer would be playing the highest pitch, and then the second ocarina would be playing the second ocarina. The second performer would be playing the second ocarina all the way down. So the names of these ocarinas are Do 1 for first ocarina, Sol 2 for second ocarina, Do 3, Sol 4, Do 5, Sol 6, and Do 7. And this particular system is mainly used throughout Italy, but they adapted it in other countries to also just use the tuning rather than the solfege, which I'll show you next. So this is Fabio Menalio's set of quintet ocarinas, and you can see that he stamps the names on the ocarina. I'm going to flip it around just so you get a clearer picture. And then let's jump over to the European system. So this is a set by Hans Rotter, fantastic ocarina maker. Unfortunately, these ocarinas are much harder to get now just because he's recently retired. So if you have a chance to grab one of these, definitely do it. And just like the Italian system, again, they still use mainly C and G ocarinas. So you have a C1 instead of Do1, G2, C3, G4, C5, G6, and C7. Now, you might also note that there are now F ocarinas in the mix. The reason for this, I believe, is because of the Asian influence. F ocarinas are very popular in the Asian market, and we're going to talk about those systems in a minute too, and how they adapted those names into this set. But the European system still focuses on the septet, the 7-piece ocarina ensemble for their naming system. The one exception to the makers in Europe who use this system is Oliver Gosselink. And I actually think that his set makes the most sense when it comes to naming the ocarinas, actually giving each one a name. So while he still uses the European base, C1, G2, C3, and so forth, he also added the names from the recorder family. So we have the C1 piccolo, the G2 sopranino, the C3 soprano, the G4 alto, the C5 tenor, the G6 bass, and the C7 bass. I don't know why he didn't include the contrabass on this one, But the thing that I like most about this particular system is that just about every ocarina has a different name. And then just going back to standardization, um, if we were not using the European system and we just wanted to use the name like an alto C or a bass C, something like this would avoid the confusion of having like an alto G or an alto F, a soprano G, soprano F. You would just say the name, piccolo, soprano, sopranino, alto, and you would know what the instrument was. But again, I also really like the European system because it's not as confusing for that point as well. You still have C1, C3, C5, C7, and that lets you know the size of the ocarina regardless. The difficult part of using this system around the world is that in order to understand what size ocarina that is, you also have to be a little more familiar with the ocarina's history and the ensemble. And just in all the years I've been playing and teaching, a lot of people don't know about the ocarina septet, and so that's been one of our goals with our ocarina ensemble, is to just educate people about this was the creator's intention. Any questions so far? I'm going to save some questions at the end, but before I move on, I just want to make sure I'm not leaving people behind while I take a sip of coffee because it's early. I'll also say that this is probably um, the system that requires the least explaining. Again, because all you have to do is say, well, there's a septet, and then each ocarina in the septet has a name. That's about as simple as it gets. All right, great. Let's move on. So this is, like I said, this is going to take a little more explaining, but then we move on to ocarinas in Asia. And the we can't really talk about ocarinas in Asia without going back and discussing Heinrich Fehn, who was an ocarina maker in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he was an Austrian maker and probably the largest ocarina manufacturer at the time. He had a set of 28 ocarinas, each one in a completely different key. And the really interesting thing is that he had numbers even in between the numbers. So his main ocarina line was 1 through 27. I mean 1 through 21. And then he had half keys in between, which I didn't have space on the screen for this, but he had like 4 3/4 and 10 and a half and 14 3/4. And it was a little confusing, but he had the largest range of ocarinas in the market at the time. And although they were selling well in Europe, he wanted to expand, but had a difficult time explaining, I guess, marketing the difference in the sizes. And so he had them tuned like in every single key imaginable, but in order to just make it easier to understand, he started to divide them into soprano ranges, alto ranges, bass ranges, and contrabass ranges. And it's my understanding that this is the reason that tenor ocarinas aren't more popularized in the ocarina world. I tried doing as much research as I could into discovering why he decided to leave out tenor, but he did. He didn't include it, and because his ocarinas were so popular and he was manufacturing and distributing them all over the world, eventually they made it to Asia, and rather than including the numbers, they started to adapt using this system to their ocarina collections and focusing only on C, G, and F ocarinas for a really long time. Um, and so the F ocarina is really popular in Asia, but this is the Asian system as we know it. This is probably the most widely used system in Taiwan, in China, in Japan, and South Korea. And we have the soprano C, soprano G, soprano F, alto C, alto G, alto F, bass C, bass G, bass F, and then the contrabass C. And you can see some ocarinas here that use it. There is Focalink, Popolo from Japan, Noble from South Korea, TNG from Taiwan. Knight uses an adapted version of this, which we're going to talk about in a second. Um, So Knight is probably the second most well-known ocarina maker in Japan. And somewhere along the line, they started to, although they used the top 6 ocarinas from the Asian system, they started to incorporate tenor in place of the bass ocarinas. And instead of a contrabass, they added a bass at the end. But tenor C is essentially a bass C, tenor G is a bass G, and then bass C is a contrabass C. This is also used for Zen in South Korea, which I think is one of Milt's favorite ocarina makers. And then we have something called the Japanese system, and this is used by Tiamo from Japan, Cantare from Japan, and Alos from Japan as well. And this seems to be more in line with the Fein system because they use the number to signify its place within their own system, but they also include the tuning of the instrument, just like Fein did. And just to give you an idea of how these line up with the Asian system, I put it A at the beginning of the ocarina name, just so you know that's the Asian soprano C, Asian soprano G. Sorry. And so here, just looking at the second column, 4C, their 4C is the alto C, as opposed to C3 from the European system or the C6 from the Fein system. But they stick with C, G, and F ocarinas. And then finally, the most confusing of the Asian systems is Akita. And Akitagawa was probably the first ocarina maker of Japan. And he's the one who invented 12-hole ocarinas. And I'm not sure why he did it this way, but typically when you're looking at the naming systems that are used in the ocarina world, they usually name them and order them in order of size. So usually it's C is the highest, soprano C, and then soprano G because that's a fifth down, and then F is underneath that. But for some reason, they put F in the second spot, even though tuning wise, it's usually below G. So you have 1C, 2F, 3G, 4F, 5C, which is their alto C, 6 E flat, 8 E flat, 9G, 10F, 12C, and 14C. This is where it gets a little bit crazy though. So for some reason, they put double ocarinas. They put a double ocarina in the middle of their naming system. So if you look at this chart here, the T4F, even though it's the fourth ocarina in their system, it's a double ocarina. And then there's an alto C. And I guess they did this because of the size, technically. But then they also have the E flat ocarinas, which is also confusing. And I couldn't figure out what the number 7 was. So these are probably also the most accessible ocarina in Japan. They have a partnership with Prima. I think they're called Prima Gaki, or they used to be Prima Gaki. And they're just an instrument seller in Japan. And they also partnered with Akita in the 80s, I believe, 80s or 70s. And so they're widely distributed and very well known. But this it's just really confusing with this weird naming system. So that's it for the Asian systems. Any questions so far? While I take another sip of coffee. Again, we have the Q&A button, so if you want to also submit there, you can. Thank you. This is my Legend of Zelda mug.
Someone asked about arranging with the various names and classification systems.
Yes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end, but most of the arrangements that I've seen for septet specifically have either been with the European system or with the Asian system. With the European system, I've seen it obviously from Italy. Emiliano Berganozzi is an incredible arranger, and he publishes a lot of his music through Noble Ocarina, and they use the Asian system. So it's usually comes down to those two, because the thing with arranging for music too, especially when you're purchasing it, it's not cheap, and so you have to have larger companies who are willing to publish the music, and so Emiliano partnering with Noble Ocarina was perfect, because I think they tried to include both of those two systems. But now, whenever we arrange music, like with my septet, we always use the Asian system, just because here in the West and in the Americas, it's probably the most widely accepted and well known. We can, and on that note, we can continue on. So ocarinas in the Americas. What systems do we use over here? It's mostly the Asian system. These are some of the ocarina makers that are using the Asian system today: Oberon, Spencer, Luna Kelta, Sakura Waita, Bento Kanta, Ocarina Karo. And it's only because of the internet that we were able to start to adapt using their system. But there are a couple exceptions. So Songbird Ocarina also uses the Asian system, with the exception of their tenor, G, and F. And I play a little bit of a part in this, because early on, when Songbird started to distribute focal length ocarinas, we were talking about what to call the ocarinas, because he didn't want to confuse people with the names that were coming from Asia, because of that overlap of the alto C, alto G, alto F. And so we started discussing why isn't there a tenor? And I just told him, I don't know. Let's just call it a tenor. But now, after like 7 or 8 years in knowing more about these classification systems, I think it would be less confusing if he just changed it back, but he's already in too deep, I guess. So like his muse, you see there on the left center column, that's a tenor. He would also call the focal lengths at the top tenors as well. And also the song, the Ocarina of Time at the bottom left, that he also considers that a tenor. And then the other exception is Hind ocarinas. Hind also use an adapted version of the Asian system, with the exception of he uses a soprano D for his inline family, and he also includes a tenor F. So you could make an argument that changing the tenor F and tenor G from alto C and alto G and alto F, that this could be a version of the American system. And there's been discussions about having an American system. We were talking with Spencer Register about when he starts releasing his larger ocarinas, what he's going to name them. And he agrees that having a tenor G and a tenor F would make more sense. And so he might be using this system as well. My issue with that is that it's already confusing enough. And this was the purpose of my original video, was that I wanted to make an argument for adopting one of these two systems, because in the other parts of the world, they're already being heavily used. So just tweaking it and throwing a tenor in there, I feel was going to make it more confusing, especially when you have a system like this. And I explained this in the video, why STL uses these names for their ocarinas. And originally, when STL was just starting out, they had only just ordered 3 ocarinas to be distributed. They had a soprano C, an alto, soprano F, and an alto C. And because it was really early on, this was like 2005, 2006 that they started distributing TNG ocarinas, they decided, well, we don't really want to get into the ocarina business, so we're just going to sell these as a side business for our school, the St. Louis School of Music, and they could just call it soprano. The soprano C became a soprano, the soprano F became an alto, and the alto C became a tenor. Soprano, alto, tenor. It makes sense. However, they did get into the ocarina business, and it became this. The soprano C is the same, the bass C is the same, but everything else is different. So the alto G and alto F are actually soprano Gs and soprano Fs. The tenor C and tenor G and tenor F would be considered altos in the Asian system, but thankfully they kept the bass C. And this has been the largest source for confusion within the ocarina community. I feel that because of the use of tenor in the alto C position, I can understand the tenor being used in the place of the alto F and the alto G because it fits nicely between the alto C and the bass C. However, them moving the tenor up in the place of an alto C when everyone else, pretty much every other company in the world, calls the alto C just that, it's caused so much confusion with beginners. So that goes back to the naming systems of the European and the Asian, and why I think these are the most beneficial for the ocarina community today. Again, with the European system, it all you have to do is explain, well, with the septet, the smallest ocarina is the 1 and the lowest ocarina is a 7, and everything else is just in order with C's and G's. C1, G2, C3, G4, C6, C5, G6, C7. Pretty straightforward. The Asian system is a little more confusing at first, but because most of the world now, the Americas, throughout Asia, and even some companies in Europe are now using that system, I think it's perfectly fine if we don't include the tenor. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we get to questions were the benefits of standardization. And I didn't really go into this in my video. However, I did see some criticisms, especially because people were saying, in response to the title, tenor ocarinas don't exist. Uh, people were just saying, but tenor ocarinas do exist. So yes, I acknowledge some people call their altos or their basses or even their they rename their ocarinas tenors. But it's very confusing, especially for people just getting into the ocarina. I feel now with like our online ocarina communities, and even when we're in person, when a beginner comes in and people are throwing all these different names around, it's very difficult to choose a first ocarina, let alone if they're collectors. Because if somebody sees that they purchase, after purchasing a tenor ocarina from STL, which is an Alto C, and let's say that they want to expand their collection. So now that they have a tenor C, they want to go a little bit cheaper, and they go for an Alto C, not being able to see in person the difference between the two. Well, now they have two Alto C ocarinas because of the naming difference. It's also difficult when people are just like having normal discussions and they're saying, oh yeah, I have a tenor C ocarina, but everyone knows it's an alto C. It's a little bit awkward to be like, actually, most people will consider that an alto C. And just going back to the confusing thing, for educators, as a teacher myself, then also having worked with Nicholas, who is a fantastic teacher, when you are telling your students to get a particular ocarina, or that they get to use a particular ocarina, or if they have to go and buy a specific ocarina, it's very confusing, especially for younger kids, to go out and try to figure all this out on their own. A lot of people take this up as a hobby, but when you're a student and you have to have a specific ocarina, it's important that you get the names right. And so to have to re-explain every single time, make sure you get a tenor C, also called an alto C, also maybe a C3. That's a lot of names to throw out there for someone who's just getting started and who's trying to learn. And it can be discouraging as well. And then more important for me, for composers and performers, standardization is just part of the music world. Every instrument, just about every instrument has a family. Even tin whistles, which is considered a folk instrument as well, is a family of instruments. And so if a composer put a tin whistle in D in this part, the performers or an orchestra would know exactly what instrument to put. But if a composer put a tenor C in this part, well, do they mean the bass? Do they mean do they, or did they just put a tenor ocarina in this part? Do they mean the F tenor, the G tenor, the a C tenor, or do they mean an alto C? It's just very, very confusing. And in fact, I saw a score recently. I forget the composer, but it said for high ocarina, for low ocarina, and for mid ocarina. What the heck does that mean? And so I think it just hurts the instrument in the long run by us not adopting a standard. It hurts for education. It hurts for people just entering the community, and then it hurts people who are trying to get the instrument out there by writing music for it and performing for it on not just a classical level, but just in general. That's it. That's my rant. Questions, comments, criticisms?
I know there were a few comments and questions. They were a lot of them were basing themselves off of, oh, is my tenor C actually called an alto C? And I know me and a few others were trying to also kind of explain that in the chat as well. Just because of the name that you were talking about too, and the help for a standardized system. So I know like there were like two, I think, questions about that. Um, and I also made a really small, like little asterisk about that maker that I had mentioned to you earlier about he's from Chile. I actually recently posted a video on GOC about his workshop and stuff. He names his ocarinas that are in the range of a bass C, he names them tenor C.
Mhm.
Which is kind of interesting. I thought, but I also kind of put a little bit of my experience with my students as well. Yeah.
Well, that's similar to what Knight and Zen do. They also call their tenor C a bass C.
Okay. Maybe that's where it comes
Uh,
from.
I mean, they're bass C, a tenor C. Yeah, and a big part of that is also, I mean, one part of it is trying to make sense of the system, which is what STL did. They had three size ocarinas, and so they just said soprano, alto, tenor. But then the other part of it is influence, and that's what happened with Fane, because Fane was distributing everywhere. Different ocarina makers saw that system in place, and then they just adapted it bit to the best of their understanding. Whereas if there was some sort of a standard that most ocarina makers use, it would have more influence over future ocarina makers that would just keep it going. So yeah, that's another thing, is like, which tenor do they mean? Do they mean the bass? Do they mean the altos? So that's why I would just like to do away with the word tenor altogether. Narrow asks an interesting question. Which numbers do the makers that use the European system use when they make ocarinas that are not in G or C? And I meant to address this earlier too. So if we go back to the European system, you can see that they use, here we go. That they started including the F ocarinas, most likely because of the Asian market. And you can see that they continue to use that number. Like for G2, we also have the F2. So what they started to do, especially Hans Rotter, he would, any ocarina that would fall between that fifth, between the G and the C, they would continue with that number. So G2, F2, E2, D2, and then C3, I'm blanking, B flat 3, A3, and then G4. Does that make sense? So if it falls between a C and a G, whatever the number above that would continue on until the next ocarina in the septet. I'm looking through questions. Yeah, I would agree with Warner that the European system is the cleanest, especially if you keep that in mind. So if you see a B flat 3, you know that that's between the G4 and the C3 in theory, and they would just continue on. If you wanted a B flat between the bass G and the bass C, it would be a B flat 5. It would help if we had a chart. I'll make another chart. Any other questions?
We do have a question in the Q&A. Says, does that match the singing/voice system or not? Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. What about flute systems, and how do they do it as I guess flute players?
I'm actually not familiar with the classical flute. I'm more familiar with like the folk instrument side. What was the first part of that question?
So the first part of the question is, does it match singing or voice systems, like the vocals, soprano, alto, and tenor, like the ranges of the ocarinas themselves?
I got it. No, the ranges are different, and I do know that that is something it does not have in common with the flute. Is that the ocarina reads an octave higher than what you see on the page. I believe with classical transverse flute, it reads on pitch. It's concert pitch. So what you see is what you hear. But because this is a transposing instrument, anything that you see on the page, especially for a C, an alto C ocarina, is an octave higher. And that's the other interesting thing too when you're writing music out, is you can either write it in concert pitch, or you can write it in transposed pitch. And most transcriptions I've seen for ocarina are always transposed pitch, meaning that whatever you were seeing on the page has been adapted to that specific ocarina it's written for. So, for example, I could probably just show you a score really quickly. So this is La Primavera, arranged by Benagozzi in partnership with Noble Ocarina, and he uses both the European system and the Asian system. So here you can see he has the number for the ocarina, but also the Asian name. And then if you just look at the key signature, for the C ocarinas, he has two sharps, meaning it's in the key of D major. However, the G ocarinas are all playing in G. And when you hear if you looked at the concert score, only about, maybe only the bass line would actually be on the score, and then everything else would be ledger lines. It would all be above the staff. But because it's transposed, he put it cleanly on each one on the staff. And that makes it way easier for ocarinists too, because you don't have to think extra hard about it not being on the page. But to answer your question about the choir stuff, no, all ocarinas are transposed pretty much, except for the bass C. That's the only one that's true concert pitch.
It's really interesting to know that, and I also find a lot of the times that the alto ocarina range matches a child singing range, so it's really interesting. I may go over that through during the educational part of the festival, but when that person asked the question, it made me think of how the alto ocarina is really good for a beginner singer or for a starter singer, because it matches their range and they can relate their singing to the ocarina, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was also a question from Stephanie as well, or rather, I'm sorry, she was asking first about six holes. So her question was, she wants to write down how the classification system, or I assume kind of the Asian or the European one, applies to the sixth hole, if it's the same or if it's different. She has soprano, alto, and bass for a sixth hole. She also was mentioning regarding what you said about flute, to answer the other person, that she's a flutist, and the alto flute is tuned in G, and the concert flute is in C, and the bass flute is in C.
Awesome. That's good to know. Yeah, for the pendants, again, I think it comes down to the maker. But really, the only reason that naming systems are important is for communication. So if you are arranging something just for yourself, it really doesn't matter what you call each ocarina. Where it becomes difficult is when you're communicating to another person, this piece is written for this ocarina, and you have to specify something. Otherwise, they don't know how to play it. And that's why it's especially important for composers and performers, because most of the time when someone writes a piece of music, it's not because you're going to play it. It's because you intend someone else to play it. And so that's where the standardization makes the most sense, is that people, because it's a transposed instrument specifically, you have to know what's going to be in tune with any other instruments, a backing track, or what's going to fit the right range. And that's the other challenging thing too, is that ocarina makers um, sometimes don't all make 12-hole ocarinas. Sometimes they make 6-hole ocarinas, which only has an octave in a major second, up to, like, in a C 6-hole, it's low C to high E. So you couldn't play the same piece with a 12-hole ocarina. And so you have to specifically say, this piece is for a 12-hole alto C, or this piece is for this piece can be played with a 6-hole G ocarina. And the more that you can communicate that, the less homework that the performer or the collector or whoever is getting this piece or this ocarina, the less digging that they have to do. Shelby, that's a great question. You could write it for a specific key. In fact, I've done that with my sheet music. I've just said, this can be played with an ocarina in C. And then you could just let the performer choose which ocarina they want. However, again, you go back to the range issue. Can it be played with a 6-hole, with a 10-hole, with a 12-hole? You got to be specific. We have 5 more minutes, so we can pretty much talk about anything you guys want. I'll just throw this on the screen too. In case people do have questions, or if they want to see the sheet music that I make. Or if they had questions for Zaijin too.
So Stephanie was asking if tuning for the 6-hole ocarina was possible.
If these naming systems were possible.
I'm not sure if she means like specifically tuning, like in tune with each other. Tuning
I'm looking for it.
It's at the very bottom. I was also gonna say, if you do get a chance to, if you want to share like the way you write music or how you arrange music, that could be helpful to a few in here that have been asking, questions about how to write for ocarina or how to classify. Maybe helpful to kind of get a good idea of that.
Sure. So, let me think about this. Yeah, so I guess it goes back to the type of ocarina that you have, first of all. And then the deal with it being a transposing instrument also plays a part. So first, when I'm trying to transcribe music, I try to make sure that it fits the ocarina's range. I have a very large collection, so it's way easier for me. So let's just pretend that all you have is a C, like an alto C and a soprano G ocarina. So once you've kind of figured out generally how the tune works, like if it fits on your C ocarina, you can also adapt the melody. So if it's out of range of like a 12-hole alto C, you can transpose. So let's say that the verse section fits nicely in the 12 holes range, but the chorus section of the song goes way out because it's too high. Well, you can actually drop down the chorus section so that it fits within the ocarina's range nicely. It doesn't sound as good in my opinion because this goes back to composition, but it doesn't have like a peak or a crescendo with how it's written. So, but if you just want to play it, so you could do that. You can transpose it down, and then just keeping in mind that the ocarina is already meant to be transposed. So if I have an alto C, technically, if you're looking at concert pitch, which is exact what you see is what you hear. The ocarina's range, the alto C's range is goes above the staff. So that's when you get into the ledger lines, but you're going to be writing it down an octave. And that makes it way easier. So you don't have to learn and remember how the ledger lines work. And then it's just understanding how the written notes correspond to your particular ocarina. So making it a little bit trickier. Let's say that you're playing a G ocarina and you need to transpose it, not just down an octave, but down an octave and a half. At this point, I just know that with the G ocarina, like I have one here, this is C, G, A, B, C. And man, this is difficult to talk about because you have to explain transposition. Yeah, so you would have to, Nicholas, how do I explain this? You have to
Sorry, I was on mute. So as far as transposition, like, were you wanting to explain like the difference? I'm sorry, I was messaging somebody. Was it about the question for like how it's seen on the staff?
Yes. So let's say that I'm writing for man, it's a simple tune. I guess it would help if we picked a simple tune. So I want to play like Mary Had a Little Lamb in C, but I have a G ocarina.
Okay. So if you were writing it out in concert pitch, you would have to transpose it up a fifth, I think.
Yes. Yeah, wait.
If right?
Yeah.
I think about it as like each ocarina's C, like when you see the C position of an ocarina, whatever that is, it's do. And so I think about it in solfege. And maybe that helps a little bit. But if I think about the G in do, then I think G do. If I think about like an F in do, then I think F do. And I just transpose from C major to F major, and that's how I think about it without going into a really long explanation.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to avoid, the really long explanation. But yeah, like movable do is probably the easiest way to do it. So and I know Europeans hate this, when in Western, I mean, in music here in the States, we have something called movable do. So depending on the key, you would say that the first note in the key is do. So in C major on a C ocarina, my do is C. But if I was going to play an F major, now this is my do. So do re mi fa sol. And it's with that mentality that you're able to transpose easier. So again, if I was going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb here, That's London Bridge. Sure, we'll do London Bridge. So my do in this piece is C. If I wanted my do in this piece to be C on this ocarina, it's now this. However, the fingerings have now changed. So what I would have to do is I would write this as an F on the sheet music instead of as a C. And even though I'm reading an F, because this would be considered the F on a C ocarina, it's going to come out as C. So what people hear is C. And then you would just continue to write as if you're playing in F major, but what's actually being heard is C major. That's probably the easiest way to explain it.
So a few things that have been written in the chat. I think Jean said that she had learned transposition from, I think, a music theory website. Just to give everybody a little bit of background, music theory can get into like really long explanations, but the systems that David was talking about fixed do and movable do, there's, I think, 3 widely used systems, and each one of them has like a different purpose. Fixed do is where every single solfege syllable is assigned like a real pitch. Like do would be C and it would always be C. That's the fixed do system. The movable do system is when do changes according to the key. So C is do in C major, G in G major would be do. Just without going into a long explanation. Also, the last system is called movable la or la bass minor, which is kind of similar to movable do, but it kind of encompasses like starting la in a minor key and more thinking about pitches in minor. Um, Yes, yes. And there was another thing that Jordan wrote here. He said, you can also read music as if it's in a different clef in order to transpose it, if you know how to read bass clef, for example, as well. So these are all really good points. And one last thing, going to back to what Stephanie was saying, and maybe this could be a really good question for you, David, that you can tell us more about. She was talking about how she was having trouble tuning her ocarinas that may have been like in different keys. And it's possible maybe she has ocarinas by different makers. So I know we haven't really talked a whole bunch about how the ocarina has like variable tuning based on like the breath, the way the maker makes it, and how it's tuned. Can you talk a little bit about what challenges you can face when you're trying to tune ocarinas?
Yeah, so that's a great point about I haven't heard it quite put as variable tuning, but I love that. Yeah, so this is the other challenging thing about standardization is that most ocarina makers start off as hobbyists, and just in the people that I've met, most are not classically trained, or even like have a strong music theory background. It's just that they do their best to try to figure out how the tuning works and all that. And so I have a friend here in the States, Sandy Schmidt up in Seattle, and every ocarina she puts out is relative to that particular ocarina. She doesn't really try to tune them with each other. She just tries to make them play. And that's been a primary focus for many beginning ocarina makers, is that they just want to make them play. Fair enough. Um, and so depending on, like, if you were trying to perform with one of Sandy's ocarinas, it wouldn't be as adaptable as, say, like an ocarina from Hans Rotter or from STL, because they all try to match the tuning, like A440 pitch, which is the standard tuning for most musical instruments in the West. And so it really depends on the maker that you get it from. If it's someone like Focalink, you know that a G ocarina is going to sound like a G ocarina. Same thing with their C ocarinas. The other thing to note is that every ocarina maker uses a different breath curve or even a different breath pressure. So if you were going to play an ocarina by Manalio from Italy, it takes a lot of breath pressure to play in tune, like very strong, borderline brass. Um, and uh, and so you have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, it's going to play sharp. The alternative is if you're going to play something like one of Charlie Hines' ocarinas, which is a very soft breath pressure, and if you blow stronger than what he intended, it's going to play sharp. So you have to know what the maker's style is like, and also what their intention is too. And so you just have to learn. You have to spend time with your particular instrument and understand what the requirements are for each one. Which is crazy because even some makers make their ocarinas with different breath pressures. Like going back to Focal Link, they have their Forte series and their Dolce series. The Dolce series took a lot less breath than the Forte series, and consequently, the Dolce series is much quieter than the Forte series because the more breath it needs, usually the louder it is. And so what I usually recommend to people who are trying to figure out the tuning stuff is to have a tuner or a piano, and then just either hit a C or an F, and then just be conscious of how much breath you're using, and then to play with the scale, and then just to take note of how much breath each note requires. And if you're more prone to like playing by ear, you can also just like try to make sure that each note is in tune with the next one.
There's a really good app called Tonal Energy, and it can do a little bit of this. Give you something called a drone, which is something that you can use to tune as you practice. And also you can access free drones on YouTube. If you type in cello drone, they sound really, really nice, and you can practice with them. Just wanted to say that since you mentioned playing with a real pitch reference.
And I don't remember if this one is free, but I have two apps on my iPhone that I really like. There's Tempo. Tempo is not free, but it's one of my favorite because it's a metronome. And then Ins Tuner, like Instant Tuner, INS Tuner. And that one, I'll just show you how that one works. So it works like a tuner, like you would play a pitch, and then it goes around this, or actually up here, it's a meter, and it shows you when you're in key or on pitch. And then it also has a tone generator. Let me see if it plays. This is C. This is F. And it's super handy for just like figuring out the breath requirements. Maybe one more question before we wrap up.
Can you say the names of the apps again? Stephanie was also asking about the names of the apps.
This is Ins Tuner, INS Tuner. And then the other one was Tempo. And although Tempo is primarily a metronome, it also has this tone generator. So it's similar. But I like the Ins Tuner better.
I love that tune that you just played. That was a tritone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie, for asking so many questions, by the way. Really appreciate that. All right. Well, show your virtual applause for David for being here today. We're so happy to have learned from you about ocarina classifications, and just hearing you speak about your practice, what you do, and all the stuff that you have in general is always, always amazing. I was gonna ask, was there any other closing things that you wanted to say? I know he has a performance tonight, and you won't want to miss that one. What time is your performance, David?
4 p.m. Central, I believe. Actually, it's 4:30 Central, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Eastern.
Pacific?
My times are mixed up.
Okay,
4:30
okay.
Pacific, 6:30 Central.
Yes. Sorry,
Yep.
I had to quiz you on your time zones there.
Too early, Nicholas.
David. Thank you so much.
Yes. You're welcome. Bye, guys.
All right, I'm getting my camera back as we speak. Hang on just a minute, and then we'll close down the session in just a minute. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. Hello, everybody. Here, I'll spotlight my video for a minute. Okay, so again, we learned so much from David. If you did have a question, you thought of something, and or you think of something later, put it in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to send it to David. I know he really appreciates us being here at the festival, and I know I appreciate all of y'all. So the plan for today, for later, is going to be we will be coming back at 1 p.m. for our septet panel. This is going to be a 21-person panel potentially. There may be a few that can't make it. I already know there's one from Silverwind that won't be available, but closest to 21 people panel as we can get. We will be back at 1 p.m. Central, which is an hour. Take a break, go eat lunch. I know I'm going to take a really quick break to test a bunch of things and just like have a snack because I haven't eaten anything in a lot of hours. So please feel free to message any questions on the Gawk Facebook page. If you haven't gone over there to be a member, try to make sure you sign up to join, just because there will be real-time updates for the festival. Also, what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, it's the same link as the one that I sent earlier. So whichever link that was on the email, be sure you access that one. Any other questions before we log off? All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in an hour. Bye.